feel like people who are into photography, especially here on YouTube, really like big numbers. And while big numbers are, impressive on paper and on screens, just how good is a setup that costs less than a budget lens? Here it is, the cheapest Micro Four Thirds setup I could find on MPB. MPB definitely didn't sponsor this video, I just used their website way too much. We have the Panasonic Lumix GF3 body and the Olympus 15mm f8 body cap lens. In fact, at the time I bought them, they weren't just the cheapest Micro Four Thirds setup, they were the cheapest interchangeable body and lens combination of any system that MPB had. Surely there's a reason they were so cheap, right? So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna evaluate each part of this kit separately, then see what they're like together and give my thoughts on this genuinely pocketable setup. So let's start with the body. The GF3 released in mid-2011. That's over a decade ago. And honestly, if you look to the back of it, it looks like one of those old budget point and shoot cameras that everyone had. You know, the kinds that would run on AA batteries and after about 10 images they'd just die. And just like those bodies, we even have a tiny little pop-up flash. But unlike those old compact cameras, we can put any Micro Four Thirds lens on this body, and we can even adapt lenses from other systems to fit on this. Micro Four Thirds is still getting new gear. I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. The body has, let's say, minimal controls. We have our on-off switch at the top, and we have 3 buttons then. We have our shutter button, our record video button, and an intelligent auto button that, when it's in use, glows a nice blue, which I actually kind of like. I don't know why I like that, but I do. Then moving over to the back of the body, we have a click wheel, a back button or quick menu button, a gallery button, and a touchscreen. The touchscreen is actually pressure sensitive as opposed to using like the capacitance. So like you could touch this with gloves on, you could touch it with keys, although I wouldn't recommend that, and it'll still work. It just takes a while to get used to using not a nice fancy glass touchscreen. And like I mentioned, we do have a little pop-up flash. Although you will notice that at the top of the body there's no hot shoe mount and there's no EVF. The body is small in the hand, but we have a little thumb grip that kind of makes it not super uncomfortable. I just have big hands, so I kind of don't know what to do with my pinky finger and I'm kind of grabbing it weird. I do have a little quick release thing here for a wrist strap that I use when I'm using any lens that's not this body cap lens. Let's talk about the lens. At the time I bought all this, this was the cheapest Micro Four Thirds lens on MPB. It was tied with the 9mm body cap lens, but I thought the 15mm would kind of be a bit more versatile for everyday shooting, whereas 9mm, that's a bit too wide for my liking, whereas this is closer to an equivalent 30mm frame of view, so I went with that. They were the same price. Since then, a 12 to 32 little pancake zoom has gone up on MPB for €3 less, but it has some sort of fungus in the lens. So I'd have probably gone with that as opposed to this. That was the only one of that lens that was that cheap. The rest are, a bit more expensive, whereas the body cap lenses are always this price. So the lens has no electronics in it at all. We have a fixed f8 aperture, and we have 2, we'll call them focus points. We have infinity, and we have 30 centimeters. Or I like to think of them as far away and close, because there's no point with precision here, you're shooting with a body cap. I actually do quite like this, which is like you don't have to bother with a lens cap, which means you can just do that. And yeah, it sounds plasticky and cheap because it's plasticky and cheap. So like I said, there are always plenty of the 9mm versions of this lens, but very, very rarely do I see a 15mm go up on MPB. So I just snagged one because I do quite like that focal length. And one thing I noticed is that the frame of view you get on this is actually pretty close to what my smartphone shoots at. Like I said, there's absolutely no electronics in this lens, so I had to set the GF3 to shoot without a lens attached. So if you're shooting this lens on a camera with in-body stabilization, like my G9 and my EM5 Mark II, you're gonna have to go and actually set the focal length in settings so that the stabilization knows what focal length you're shooting at. It's a bit like when you add a vintage lens to the camera. The lens doesn't really add anything to your camera's footprint. In fact, on both of my proper cameras, the actual grip extends out further than this lens. I mean, if you're going out shooting and you would go with a body cap already on your body, you might as well just add this lens to get an extra lens, and it takes up no space in the camera bag. You can fit this in that little pouch that they put in most camera bags for like filters and SD cards. So that's the lens and the body. How do they work together? So I talked about my everyday carry photography setup a while ago, and it's essentially the EM5 Mark II with the Lumix 12-60 on it. And as much as I try and take that setup with me everywhere, sometimes it's a bit of a hassle. And I mean, that's just having a bag on you sometimes in public is a bit of a hassle. This is so much smaller. This is genuinely pocketable. And I don't mean you could slide this into your hoodie pocket. I mean, you could fit this in like a pair of skinny jeans and it's gonna be fine. Like I said, in the lens, we have two focus points, close and far away. And with this setup, that is your only option. It reminds me of shooting on those old disposable film cameras where you just point and shoot, that's it. There's no autofocus, there's no nothing. Something I've discovered about myself creatively is that I quite like being confined. And I know that sounds really strange, but when you eliminate zooming in and when you eliminate choosing a focus point, that gives you more opportunity and time to focus on other aspects like composition, which is kind of the only thing you can really focus on when you're using this setup. Another way the system confines me is megapixels. The body is 12 megapixels, and that is not a small amount. A 4K display is 8 megapixels, HD video, which is what this video will be uploaded as, is only 2 megapixels. But I do notice myself not being able to crop as much as I'd like. Now that's two reasons. The lens isn't super sharp, and also just when you're shooting with low megapixels like this, you get the weird smoothness of the lens and also you get the blockiness of the low megapixel count, and when those two are kind of fighting, you kind of end up with a bit of a mushy image if you crop in too much. And this 12 megapixel sensor is old. It's one of the older Micro Four Thirds sensors, so it really does not do well in low light. I'm gonna have some comparison images now showing like an indoor scene at different ISOs so you can get an idea. But in everyday shooting, even on a grey kind of dull day, noise isn't an issue. And the most I raise the ISO on this when I'm out shooting is 800. I don't need to go any higher. That did take me a while to get used to. Both my G9 and my EM5 have great in-body stabilization, and a lot of the lenses I use are also stabilized, so I can handhold for about 2 seconds and it's fine. Whereas on this, there's no stabilization in the body and there's definitely no stabilization in the lens. So you really have to have a fast shutter and then raise your ISO because you can't go for a lower aperture. Which is a shame because for street photography, I do like this setup, bar one or two things I'll mention later. And something I really like doing with street photography is going for a longer shutter, so you get that kind of anonymity as people go past and you kind of capture the space with the movement of the people in it. With this, if you try and do that, you're going to get some unintentional camera movement. So you're going to want to bump up the ISO, which is honestly fine. Like, modern noise reduction is so good. You can pop this thing, you can pop images in this through Topaz, you can upscale them, you can noise reduce them, and they come out looking great. Honestly, I got this as an experiment. I've been wanting to buy this lens for a while to use with like the art filters on my EM5 Mark II, or just to use with some of my kind of more film looking presets, so like my grainy mono or disposable, just to kind of get that old kind of softer look this lens has. But when I saw that it was the cheapest Micro Four Thirds lens, I was like, okay, let's buy the cheapest Micro Four Thirds body and make a video about it. But like I said, MPB have the 12-32 up with a little bit of fungus on the lens, so I'd probably go for that because that's stabilized and you get more options with your focal length. So where does this genuinely tiny camera fit into my workflow? Well, it just goes in my pocket and I take it places. On Christmas Day, I went to Old Head Beach. I don't know why that's a thing we do here in Ireland. A lot of people just go to the beach on Christmas. It's not like in Australia where it's the middle of summer, but I took this out with me in my pocket and I just snapped some shots at the beach, and it was kind of cool and fun not to, you know, be choosing a focus point and messing with settings. It was fun. Like I said, it has a similar frame of view to my phone, but I would choose this over my phone nearly every time. So my phone will take raw images, and while the megapixels are technically higher than what comes out of this, the dynamic range in the raw files is awful. And when you start to do any pushing and pulling in an edit, and I kind of like to edit my images, that's half of modern photography, they fall apart. I would rather take an image with less megapixels but have a higher quality raw file so I get more ability in the edit. Everyone's so obsessed with megapixels, but if you look at an image from like 6 feet away and you see banding, that's going to stick out, as opposed to if you have to go right up close to it to see like blockiness or pixels. Little rant aside, I would take this over my phone for that reason, even with this softer lens. So I do like it as a street photography setup, bar two caveats. Like, it's really small, it's inconspicuous. You look like you're shooting with an old toy camera, but it's not weather sealed, the body or the lens. And I mean, that's not really an issue for a lot of people. It rains a lot here in Ireland, but like I can wear a waterproof jacket and just stick this in the pocket when it rains. I'm not super concerned about that. But I would rather take a weather sealed body over this. And flaw number 2 for using this in street photography, it's got a very loud shutter. In fact, let me... Okay, so this is my EM5. whereas this is now the GF3. It went for a longer exposure because I'm covering the lens. It's a very clunky sounding shutter, and I just like having a silent electronic shutter for street photography, or at least a quieter mechanical shutter than this. Why not just use my phone? Well, I don't want to be someone using... I think if you're using your phone, you look a bit kind of more suspicious if you're taking images. And also adjusting settings like shutter speed and that on the phone, you gotta tap the setting, you gotta swipe to move it. Whereas on this, if I want to go to shutter mode, I use the click wheel, and now this little wheel is controlling my shutter speed. And also the camera doesn't buzz for my attention every like 30 seconds. It's great to just switch off and walk, and it's fun. Like I said, I took this to the beach and took pictures of like Crow Patrick and Old Head Beach. These were all edited with my Candy Floss preset. They're going to be part of an upcoming preset pack I plan on releasing at some point when I plan all that out. Yeah, there's no EVF. I didn't really miss that all that much. I used to shoot with the EOS M3. And while I did have a screen that articulated, I find the screen on this actually pretty decent. The viewing angles are kind of good. You can get kind of like far away from the camera and still see what's on the screen. Like, no, it's just really fun and fits in the pocket. And if that's what you're after, like just something to take everyday snapshot, I see no problem with this. What I would probably do is pair this with maybe the 14mm by Panasonic, or the 20mm, or one of the other Pancake Primes. Even the 17mm f2.8 by Olympus would fit on this and still be pretty small and fit in your pocket. I just wanted to see what the cheapest Micro Four Thirds setup is actually like. So now I want to ask, what do you think? What do you think of the images of this? I might do a photo vlog with this, or actually compare it to images taken by my phone at a later date. So if that's something you want to see, please subscribe. Could something like this fit into your photography workflow, or are you like, nah? And I definitely wouldn't shoot a wedding with this, not that I even shoot weddings. But what you could do is pass this around to the crowd and get them to take the snapshots, because it's really intuitive. You stick this in aperture priority mode with it set to focus at infinity, they just pick it up and take the picture. And then you've got a decent raw file that you can go and process if the shadows are a bit too dark or whatever. But yeah. Okay, future Eli here. I caved and bought the 12-32 for €66 just because I had to see for myself like how small and cheap that is. It's small, and I see no fungus on this at all. This was marked by MPB as either well used or heavily used. I'll put a... It looks flawless. I haven't put it on a body yet, but definitely expect to see this appearing on the channel sometime soon. That's the cheapest Micro Four Thirds setup. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like the Micro Four Thirds system and just kind of photography style content, please subscribe. I'm trying a new space for filming that's a bit brighter, just because it's dark in the other room. So that's why there's a 3D printer there. And I've got some lights off to the side. I'm hoping the lighting looks alright and that the sound is good. My wireless lab system is charging. Either way, thank you very much. Cheers.